and Maranzano, and they were going to take over. And eventually, that's what they did. They put a hit out on both of them successfully, knocked them both off. And then it was Luciano who was in control with Costello. And you understand what happened at that point. That's when Lucky said, hey, we got to be organized. We have to have an organization here. And he organized the families into what we know Cosa Nostra to be today. He created the commission. Again, Bina was with them all the time. He was a very loyal soldier at that time. Then it came a point where I believe Vito Genovese, who was also an active member at that time, he kind of got out of hand. I'm not going to get into the whole detail. It's another story. Anyway, he had to go. And what happened at that point? He became the head of the family in 1957. And to give you a little bit more about his character, there is a soldier in the Colombo family named Dominic Sciallo. They called him Mimi. I knew Dominic well in my younger years because he was at one point a soldier under my father. Came to my house all the time. And, I also knew him as Uncle Dom, but sometimes they called him Mimi, but I knew him as Uncle Dom. And there was an incident at Gargiulo's restaurant in Brooklyn when Mimi actually insulted Carlo Gambino in front of people, insulted him. You don't insult a mob boss ever, and you certainly don't insult them in front of people. But what did Carlo do? Nothing. He kind of smiled. He just didn't retaliate in any way, didn't say a word, nothing. But what did he do? You don't get away with, making fun of or being disrespectful to a boss, whether it be in public or private. So he had him killed. And who killed him? As far as I know, it was Charlie Moose Panarella. Now, Charlie was a captain in our family. I knew Charlie very, very well. One thing about Charlie Moose, he was known to be, he was like a Roy DeMeo type in that way. And I think you know what that means. His reputation was to be a killer. Now, I didn't know him that way, obviously. We were in the same crew, same family, so I knew him. I liked him. One thing that that I always remember about him, his hair was always perfectly manicured, no matter what. Always had his hair right. But he was a little gruff. A lot of guys I remember, soldiers, did not like being in his crew. But anyway, he was given the contract. My father was away at the time. This was sometime in the mid 70s, and he carried it out to a T. I think they found Mimi in cement block, encased in cement somewhere. Anyway, so you don't get away with, like I said, abusing a boss in any way, shape, or form, and that's what happened to Mimi. But Carlo, as you know, he went on to, grow one of the biggest families, if not the biggest. The Gambinos and the Genovese, bigger than the other three. Ran it successfully for 19 years, made a tremendous amount of money, was very low key. There was one point in time where they actually had a government van and they advertised that it was a government van parked outside of his house. And they were surveilling him. They were watching people going in and out. They had electronic surveillance. on him. They never got anything on him the whole time that the van was there. It's kind of remarkable to me that back then, at that time, before they had all this high tech surveillance equipment, when the government was surveilling you, they wanted you to know about it. My dad was under surveillance. He had 6 or 7 different agencies parked around our house 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They didn't make any bones about it. They were there. They wanted you to know they were there. They followed us. And it's kind of ironic to have an FBI van right outside the house monitoring everything. Well, what are you going to do? You're going to do anything to get in trouble? It was so bad for my dad that, in order to shake them when he had a meeting that he had to go to, we owned houses, or he did, in Brooklyn. My whole family lived in there. Remember, my dad was one of 19 kids. So there was a lot of houses in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. And some of them, the way they were located, the back of one house, the front faced one street, the back of the house faced the back of another house where the frontage was on another street. So my dad would park outside of one house, go in the house, go out the backyard, jump over the fence, go through the back of the other house, out the front where somebody was waiting to drive him. Sometimes, somebody else that I knew, and that's how he would get away from surveillance for a while. You had to be very creative back then. But it was amazing how they just stood out there and they said, "Hey, we're listening to you. Make a mistake." It was kind of silly, really. Anyway, Gambino managed to, I don't even know if he probably had a couple of arrests, but he never did any prison time. I think he had one conviction, maybe for a tax case or something like that. Never did any real time at all. He was the one guy that really managed to outsmart the government, and a guy that was under heavy surveillance, heavy scrutiny. Again, if it was in RICO times, I don't know that he would have been able to do that. There was too many other weapons and tools that the government had. Too many guys were going informants. So I don't think he'd been able to do that. But you got to give him credit because Luciano wasn't able to do it. Vito Genovese went to jail. All the big guys went to jail. You know the story. The only one that escaped was Meyer Lansky. Another very low key guy. That's the secret in that life. Don't let anybody know who you are. Stay as low key as you possibly can. But so many guys made the mistake. I made that mistake. I'll be honest with you. Look, I was making good money and, I bought myself nice things. I lived a good life. I became a target of law enforcement. I was constantly in the media also. It was a mistake. It led to my downfall in a way at that time. So you just can't do that. When you're committing criminal activity, you got to fly under the radar. Unless today, like out in LA, if you want to go steal something out of a store, you can do it in front of anybody. Just make it under $900 and then you can walk in, steal, and go out. These are crazy times. Trust me, I don't get it at all. But if you're going to be in a mob, in a gang, you got to be low key. And let me say this, I'm talking about the life and I'm talking about a guy and I'm talking that he was successful in that life. But as always, I discourage everybody from being involved in a criminal lifestyle. You're not going to make it in today's day and age. No way, no how, impossible. I've been speaking to young people and gangbangers for the last 20 years. I tell them the mob life, the street life, they're evil lifestyles. And people today, you got to do the right thing. You have to do it as best you can because, consequences are too severe for actions. When you're mob related, gang related, criminal activity, it's no good. And whatever's happening now with this defund the police and this soft on crime, it's going to reverse itself because people are not going to stand for it. The streets are not safe anymore. And you know what? There is a public outcry that's building now, and it's going to continue to build because the number one responsibility of our government on a federal and state level is to keep its citizens safe. That's it, to keep them safe. And when you're failing in that regard, you're failing in everything. So there is an outcry now. There is a revolt happening, even in democratic cities. Sorry, I have to say it because it's the blue states that are suffering the most with the soft on crime nonsense. It's going to change because people have had enough. So, again, Carlo Gambino, boss of all bosses, the most successful crime boss, I think, in history, at least in Cosa Nostra, at least in Mafia. He died in 1976. He's buried in St. John's Cemetery. My dad is buried in there. I think Lucky Luciano is buried there. Another thing about Carlo, when Luciano died, that was his good friend. He outwardly went to the funeral. And he actually, he spoke on Luciano's behalf at that point in time. So, when he had to come out, he came out, and I respect that about him. He didn't hide it. He was just a special guy in that regard. And again, the most successful mob boss of all time, Carlo Gambino.